Welcome to Live with Living Cities, the podcast where we explore bold ideas, powerful partnerships, and transformative strategies for advancing the goal of an inclusive economy. Today we're diving into one of Living Cities' most ambitious and impactful initiatives, the Inclusive Capital Council, or the ICC. At its core, the ICC is about recognizing that access to capital, such as loans, investments, and operational grant funding, is essential for building thriving businesses, strong communities, and generational wealth. Yet, for far too long, traditional financial systems have failed to serve entrepreneurs from historically marginalized communities, leaving them at a disadvantage in the very economy they help sustain. The ICC was created to change that narrative and reshape financial systems by ensuring that capital allocators with deep community trust and outstanding track records have what they need to support more businesses across the country. Imagine a local entrepreneur with a vision, a plan to launch or expand a business that could provide jobs, support families, and revitalize their neighborhood. Now imagine that dream being derailed, not because of a lack of effort, ambition, or talent, but because of outdated credit products and stringent risk assessment models that prevent their ability to access capital. These barriers don't just harm individual business owners, they stifle entire communities and widen the wealth gap. This is where the ICC comes in. The ICC is more than just about money. It's about who holds the power to decide where capital flows and how those decisions shape a more inclusive economy. A perfect example of the ICC's impact is the Miami Action. This community-driven effort, supported by Living Cities and Main Street America, is tackling a critical issue facing small business owners in Miami: exorbitant commercial rent and the risk of displacement. It all started with a local leader in Miami who spoke out about how rising commercial rents were stifling business growth, particularly in underserved neighborhoods. Through the ICC, that leader connected with a former Minneapolis city official turned capital allocator who had faced a similar challenge in their city. That connection, a direct example of social capital at work, sparked a movement. The result? A community-led commercial property acquisition fund, designed to help small business owners acquire property instead of being at the mercy of developers and investors who prioritize profits over community stability. Now, this fund isn't just an abstract idea, it's real, and it's happening right now. At the Miami Action Showcase, Living Cities and Main Street America presented initial funding to local leaders, $200,000 to structure the acquisition fund, and $100,000 toward policy solutions to keep property acquisition costs manageable. And this is just the beginning. Local leaders estimate it will take $50 million to fully address the issue. And the call is out for funders, nonprofits, and government partners to step up and invest in this community-driven solution. The ICC is proving that financial power doesn't just belong to traditional institutions. It belongs in the hands of the communities that drive economic growth. The Miami Action is a blueprint for what's possible when social capital, knowledge capital, and financial capital work together to drive meaningful change. But how does this work scale beyond one city? How do we ensure that inclusive access to capital isn't just a one-time experiment, but a fundamental shift in how financial systems work? This is where catalytic capital comes into play. So, let's talk about it. Catalytic capital isn't just another financial buzzword, it's a powerful tool for economic justice. Catalytic capital refers to financial investments such as loans and equity that spark impact and attract additional funding that might not otherwise be available. By taking on greater risk, such as accepting lower returns, requiring less collateral, and making smaller deals, catalytic investors fund high-impact projects normally overlooked by traditional financial institutions, making affordable capital available to more people. Catalytic capital is patient, flexible, and willing to take risks where traditional market forces hesitate. In moments of deep policy uncertainty, high interest rates, and escalating gentrification, this tool is what allows affordable housing to get built, emergent entrepreneurs to access funding, and entire communities to reclaim ownership over their own futures. But here's the challenge. Accessing and deploying catalytic capital requires work, a deep commitment to finding innovative alternatives to traditional financial models, and getting the support of public, private, and philanthropic investors. And that's exactly what members of Living Cities Inclusive Capital Council have committed to doing together, including the Low Income Investment Fund, or LIF, and the Allocators Collaborative, CDC. Both LIF and Allocators are part of the Inclusive Capital Council and are committed to reimagining financial risk in a way that meets communities where they are, but they're doing it at different scales. See, LIF, which is a Community Development Financial Institution, or CDFI, led by CEO Daniel Niesenbaum, is leveraging billions to deploy catalytic capital at a national level. Meanwhile, Allocators Collaborative CDC, founded by Malika Burgos Flores, is advocating for a larger flow of catalytic capital to fuel and sustain interventions that can have a lasting impact in the city of Miami, one commercial corridor at a time. As allocators and users of catalytic capital, both organizations are pushing for a new financial system to redistribute financial power and give more families a chance to build wealth. To dig deeper into these groundbreaking initiatives, we'll be talking with Dan Niesenbaum of LIF, Malika Burgos Flores of Allocators Collaborative CDC, and we'll also be joined by my colleague Santiago Carrillo, Assistant Director of Business Ownership here at Living Cities. Thank you so much for joining us at Live with Living Cities, Dan and Malika and Santiago. It's great to have you. So, Dan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and LIF and what brought you to this work?
Sure. And first, let me say I'm so pleased to be here, not just representing LIF, but as a proud member of the Inclusive Capital Council, where we've been for some time. You guys are Living Cities is such an important platform at this moment. We see that you're bringing together major corporations and major funders, and that you're sharing the kind of work that we and Allocators are doing. And you're actually holding both sides accountable. You're holding your funders accountable, and you're holding us accountable to do the work that we need, that we know needs to get done. I'm thrilled to be here with Malika. Actually, she's the real deal. She's doing the work on the ground and in the community. And frankly, LIF exists, honestly, to be in service to groups like Allocators. So LIF is a national CDFI. We've been around for 40 years. We're in 23 cities. We're about $1 billion in asset size, and we have 150 employees across 5 offices. I've been doing community development financing work for a long time in a series of banks, always financing affordable housing and projects like that. I was on LIF's board for 10 years while I was doing that work, and then I became LIF's CEO about 7 years ago.
Great. Thank you for the introduction to yourself and to LIF. Malika, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and Allocators and what makes this work so important to you?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation and for allowing me to be here with you. It's a great opportunity to share with Living Cities and with Dan, also a proud member of the ICC. I can tell you that the work that we do with the Allocators Collaborative CDC stems from a community engagement process. The community itself said, we are getting kicked out. We are getting displaced. We need to do something. And it was through the community collaboration that I'm literally in service to my community to make sure that their impetus of staying in their community, being able to own and operate their businesses and keep the legacy of the community can remain. So capital becomes a tool to make sure that they get the things that they need. Capital is not the end all be all. Capital is the tool that we need to make sure that they have the prosperous lives that they have built on their own. So really happy to be here, like I said earlier. And let me tell you a little bit more about Allocators. Allocators, it's a community in the city of Miami that precedes the incorporation of the city of Miami by 40 years. And it has been through many different changes. It used to be the Civic Center. It became a mixed community. I think that what makes it, historically notorious is that it's been mixed since its inception in the 1800s. When people were fleeing the South, they would hide in Allapattah. That's basically how the founders of Allapattah got to Allapattah. It was an interracial couple that kind of founded the area. So that's Allapattah. Right now, it's a vibrant community with a lot of small businesses, a strong Dominican legacy. And really, in the 1980s, we had massive riots like it happened in a lot of the country, cities across America. And it was really these migrant communities that brought it back up because it was disinvested in any other way. It was disinvested from a public perspective. It was disinvested from a private perspective. And it was the people who live in this community that brought it back to life. So I think that the dignity that they deserve of staying in a place that they rebuilt is really what they're asking for.
Oh, wow. That's quite a story. Very inspiring. And yes, definitely being able to remain in such a historic neighborhood that them and their ancestors built up is truly what we want to have happen. Thank you for that, Malika. So, Dan, when you look at what LIF is doing, what do you think other financial institutions could learn from your approach to equity and inclusive investing?
Great question. Let me say first and foremost that LIF is a CDFI loan fund. And so we're one part of a $450 billion industry. We exist alongside banks and other financial institutions, and we actually extend their work and we extend their reach. We're operating in places where there are no bank branches. We make smaller size loans that these banks cannot make or will not make. And we take risks that these banks cannot take, in part due to current regulation. So a really important point to make here is that while we want these institutions to take a more inclusive view to stretch, these major banks and others will probably never be able to operate exactly like a CDFI. That's why we exist. So we can be that intermediation. We can serve and help a bank whose objectives might actually be to reach into underserved communities and to support the kind of work that Allapattah is doing, as well as serving groups like Allapattah and local developers who we know are solid investments and create real impact. In other words, we intermediate between Wall Street and Main Street is another way to think about it. We actually also intermediate, this is timely right now, we intermediate across and through economic cycles, which rise and fall, as we all know. We've been doing this work for a long time. And when they fall, financial institutions naturally pull back. We might be at that kind of a moment. And so we in the CDFI industry like to say that, like, we're here at high tide, we're here at low tide, we're a constant presence. So what should folks know about us and how could they support us and support the work? They should know that CDFIs are solid investments. Can describe more about LIF and our financial capacity, but we know we're a solid investment. They should know that there's a perception of risk, be it the community, be it a target population, be it an asset class or a type of project, and that perception of risk is typically far greater than the actual risk. That's what we prove out every day. So they should know that we've been doing this work for a long time with great impact. The track record is there. Our loan loss record is actually far better than banks in many ways. So the proof of concept is strong. So I see I'm getting an amen. That's great from Malika. That's wonderful. And they should know that investing in underserved communities is an economic agenda as well as an equity agenda. We need private capital along with government capital. Our investments create housing, they create services, they create jobs, and this makes communities more sustainable. In fact, one example, which is in Malika's backyard, but a great example, we provided $1 million pre-development loan, not a big loan, to a group called 10 North, which was formerly the Apalaka Community Development Corporation. That loan will catalyze over 200 units of affordable housing. But as importantly, that development will benefit 10 North which also, by the way, provides single-family homes, small business loans, health services, financial education. It's a great investment in a deal. It's a great investment in a nonprofit, which is making a great investment in their community. So we hope people see that work. We hope people could stretch and reach and help us and support, because they are lending into these projects, but maybe not taking as much risk as we'd like. But we're there to facilitate that funding as
I love the North, so I'm glad that you're helping them.
well. We want to do more. We want to do more.
That's an excellent example to really show exactly how being thoughtful about putting capital into places that traditionally would not see it can be very impactful. And so thank you very much for that, Dan. Following up on that a little bit, you guys at Lyft are doing some amazing work and investing in some amazing communities. For folks who work in finance who are listening to this and they're probably wondering how to lean into that, what lessons or steps that do you think they can borrow from Lyft specifically into doing that kind of work, or probably persuading any decision makers that may be on the fence about getting into that kind of work?
Well, they could send me $100 million and I'd be happy to, take that funding and pass it on to do more good work. Listen, to be clear, our work has been a journey and lots of really hard lessons learned. And we're by far not the expert in the world, but we are, I think, doing good work. So here's what I would say. A couple things. Create an authentic intention for the work. If you don't do that from the get-go, you won't last too long doing the work. 2, the conventional products that you mostly find in conventional financing sources won't get us there. They're not going to get us to truly equitable outcomes. So we have to think differently. 3, although this sounds trite and people say it's really true and we've done it, you have to involve the people that you're trying to serve with the products and services that you're trying to offer. You have to do that. And lastly, I would say, to make the work most sustainable, we need to create frameworks for decision making and frameworks for evaluation. So here's what I mean by all that. First, you got to do the right thing externally. You have to do the right thing internally. We spend a lot of time with our staff and our lenders and our teams developing their understanding of equity issues so that they can learn and appreciate and understand our clients and communities better. In fact, we didn't just do that for products. We brought in an expert who looked at our credit process, actually making the loans and running it through our organization. And they reviewed our process to make sure that when we made those decisions and when we thought about allocating capital, there was no bias. And, there's unintentional and unconscious bias everywhere. This is not anti-discrimination. This is literally, thinking about where we're making loans. Second and third of the examples that I gave, you got to learn from your clients. Our more innovative and impactful offerings have been co-designed with some of our clients or some of our advisory boards. And that's taken us to a place that we're stretching, sometimes in a way that's uncomfortable, but it's got great reception and it's made a difference. So here's one good example. We created for developers of affordable housing, private developers in this example, a line of credit so that those developers could go out and build affordable housing. One small component of that line, a smaller share of that line, has been made available to those developers for something we call the pursuit loan. In other words, we're giving the developer the line of credit. They can draw on it for pre-development work for the affordable housing deal that they're focused on. But guess what? They're running a business, and these deals take 3 to 4 years. And so they need to be continuing to do some other work, and working capital is crucial. So we segmented a little bit of that, a couple $100,000, and we call it a pursuit loan. And we said, take some of that money, go out and bid on other deals, spend some money finding other deals for your pipeline while you're working on that. And if at the end of the day, it almost pains me to say this as CEO, if at the end of the day you spent that money and it doesn't turn into a project, we'll forgive that part of the loan. And by the way, we did that with support from a major bank who's funding some of this work. So that's what we heard from our client is the most important thing. We're trying to be real partners. On the face, it sounds like a big risk to make, one part of a loan that can be forgiven. But if it's made as part of a larger relationship, if it's made as part of a structure that kind of accounts for the way these developers really do work and do business, and I'm sure Malika's had that experience and operates in the same way, then the pie gets bigger for everybody, and the chance of success increases. And so that's what I would say. Sorry, I'm spending a lot of time. I would just say, lastly, on metrics and intention, we created something we call the impact, risk, and profitability framework, so that every time we do a loan, we are running it through our impact model, which we've all aligned around, and we have the same intention, and we're clear on purpose. And it's not just the how of the loan, and it's the why. And it's not just the outputs. Creating units of affordable housing is great, but we're focusing on the outcomes, which we've determined and decided and aligned around is increased power and agency for local community-based actors. And, that's an accountability mechanism for us. It's also a learning tool for us. And in fact, a major foundation that does impact investing has actually adopted our model, and we're working together. They use it for their impact investments. We use it for ours. We're sharing information, and we're learning together as we go. So anyway, that's hopefully some of that is constructive and helpful for your audience.
No, absolutely. I'm pretty sure it is. There are a lot of good nuggets in there. Thank you, Dan. Moving to Malika, I want to talk about your work in local communities. What are you hearing about the experiences of small business owners in Florida when it comes to like obtaining financing? Like what makes securing capital especially tough for entrepreneurs in neighborhoods like Allapattah?
Yeah, well, I can tell you to begin, by the way, Dan, so many CDFIs have so much to learn from you. I think that you need to go on tour and share your nuggets. I'll tell you one thing, Justin. The work that we're doing here is important because it's about setting people up for success. It's about giving people a hand up, not a handout. And it's about creating more jobs. It's about the vibrancy of our economy that doesn't necessarily rely on the huge companies. It relies on micro businesses. In Miami alone, 84% of the economy of Miami relies on micro businesses. 84% of the people work on a company that has 20 employees or less, 50 employees or less, So micro businesses, small businesses are really the bread and butter of our community. Many of the micro businesses that we work with, and I can tell you that they really many times do not understand the system, and that prevents them from having the access to capital. And part of not understanding the system is not having the right internal controls. And when they don't, and on top of that, this perception of a negative narrative, mental models that have heightened risk way beyond the actual risk, all of that contributes to that. And I'll give you the example of Mr. Balmaceda in my community. He, about 10 years ago, he wanted to buy his storefront. He had $80,000. They were selling it to him for $300,000. And he was just the seller would finance it if he got 30%, which is he would need $20,000. He could not find in any bank $20,000. And he ended up being displaced from the community. So those not knowing the resources available to them, not understanding the system is one of the biggest challenges our communities have. And that's part of the work that we do at the Allapattah CDC. We not only do a masterclass teaching them everything from AI to capital to resilience, but also sit with them and help them with the application. Because it is that practice that allows them to do it. And you'll have someone do an application once, twice, 3 times. It comes to the moment that they're doing it themselves. But you got to be patient with people and you got to meet them where they are. So I think that's the other thing is that Miami has a little bit more primitive and less robust ecosystem when it comes to impact investment and catalytic capital. We're pretty young in that front, and we're literally building it now. Literally now in 2025 is that I have been able to see investment bankers talk about impact investment, foundations talking about impact investment. We don't have foundations doing impact investment. It's a brand new concept here. So that makes it even more difficult for nonprofit like ours that want to rebuild our communities. And the other thing is that we don't have that many CDFIs in Miami. So there's just a lack of resources that honestly, there's organizations like Live Fund that are national. They don't need to be in Miami. But if we don't know about them, it's like if didn't exist. So that's what happens to a lot of the businesses into the ecosystem here.
Can I just piggyback on that a little bit? Because I think Malik is saying a couple of really important things. So what I'm hearing is that you're taking an invisible set of owners and entrepreneurs and workforce and making them more visible. And that's super crucial. And what I'm also hearing is that it's not just capital. Capital is crucial. We need more capital. But we talk about something called Capital Plus. And I think you're listening to it right now. And Capital Plus means technical assistance and capacity building, which help people realize there are resources out there and help them. You're training them to go apply for the grant or apply for the loan. There are some folks in this world who have natural advantages to be able to do that, others that do not, whether it's cultural competency or language or location or access. And I want to stress that because I think the foundation world, the one that Living Cities is deep into, has a real appreciation of that. But I think more funders need to think about that so that they're funding both the direct work and then the capacity building, which supports, Allopata's critical and crucial work. Because at the end of the day, it should be self-interest for them, because I would wager that a lot of the groups that Allopata is helping will graduate over time to be a customer of a more conventional financial services company, bank, credit union, whatever that is. That's success. Like, we don't need to keep these folks with us as clients all the time. We want them to grow. We want them to graduate into the conventional financing market, because that's just the way the world works. So the other thing we say is that groups like Allopata are community quarterbacks. These are local players who know the resources, know the access, know how to, bring resources together. It's just so essential. And I just think we're missing a level of financing and support that's not just project-based, but that's enterprise-based for groups like Allopata. It's really great examples.
Yeah, Justin, if I may just jump in, I think what we're seeing here is also the importance of connecting the different elements within the ecosystem. We're hearing from Mileka and high-touch involvement type of technical assistance and the support she's providing businesses, prospective and existing businesses in her corridor. That is very needed, but it's also, and Mileka, I hope I'm not speaking on your behalf, it's very isolated. It is happening in multiple corridors at the same time without any opportunities for them to come together to learn about, interesting practices, common challenges, and opportunities that business serving organizations and business supporters deeply rooted in communities are facing. And then they are very disconnected from the lenders, the community lenders, the CDFIs, the folks like Dan who will actually take the risks that other people won't take, that traditional banks won't take, just because they're not structured that way. And then those two players, lenders, business serving organizations, are deeply disconnected from cities who sometimes have access to state, federal grants that they're able to repurpose and fund programs that should be aligned with the goals and the mission of the Allopatas and the lives of the country. And that's without naming, the private sector and the philanthropic sector and their role in de-risking connections, de-risking the access to capital. And that work of bringing folks together, of setting the table, having Mileka and Dan have the same conversation about the risks, the challenges, and the opportunities is what we really created the ICC for, right? It's really understanding the different players in the ecosystems in the cities or in these markets and ensuring that folks who have access to capital are connected to the folks who have the know-how, the connections to invest and lend capital equitably and efficiently across the country.
Excellent. So, Santiago, you mentioned philanthropic funders and private funders. Going on that line for now, as government priorities keep shifting, in terms of their funding, how do you see those two sets of funders, the private funders and philanthropic funders, how do you see them stepping in to kind of fill the gaps?
I think that in the current climate, it's imperative that we stay committed to everyone having that shot at that American dream. I mean, if we focus on the capital is an asset, it's something important, but it's a tool to get something deeper and bigger done. I think that de-risking, like Santiago was saying, is something that is important. I think that providing guarantees, it's something that helps de-risk, loans. I think that making sure that there's that public-private collaboration. Like, for example, here, we've been really successful at working with the city of Miami and a local government to make sure that they see the need for housing that we have and that they also are part of the mix, right? But, I guess that people also need to be bold. I mean, I don't know if you saw the Gates Foundation, saying, I want all my money out in the next 20 years, I mean, that is bold. But is he saying that because he really wants all his money out in the next 20 years or because he wants to truly be impactful? Because I'm sure he's not going to do it in a irresponsible manner. You can blow a lot of money if you wanted to, but I don't think that's the case here. I think that he is trying to do the most good by doing that, right? And really shifting the mindsets of foundations. So how can foundations be really more impactful by really understanding their audiences in their constituency and the problem that they're truly solving? Many times when we have these foundations and philanthropic organizations have these boards that are just as conservative as if they were running a Fortune 500, and that being that conservative, it's important at some points, but it's also counterproductive if you're trying to do something that is completely different than the status quo.
I love that thinking, by the way. I think that concept of guarantees, not just funding from foundations, it's innovative. We've seen a few people do it. It sort of spares, it's a great use of their endowment. And we know, again, most of these projects succeed very well. It's back to that perception of risk. So I think that's a great call to action, and we'd love to see more of that. And by the way, this is in the context of an astonishing amount of private wealth. We have to remember that. So your question, Justin, started off with governments stepping back. Who's going to step in? There's only one Mackenzie Scott, as far as I'm concerned, who has been that heroic actor and a true leader in this space, but that's a whole separate conversation. Look, it's a super challenging moment. We all have to recognize it's challenging all along, and now in this current administration, it's even more challenging because it's very clear where their intention is and where their intention may not be. So look, our business model in general, maybe at the LIF level, and I think probably also at the CDC level or project level, is you need banks, you need government, and you need philanthropy. That's how these deals come together. We all know they're layered financing. Actually, if you can create more units than sources of financing, you've actually won the war. Super challenging. So one of the main drivers for banks in terms of their investment in community development is, as you know, the Community Reinvestment Act regulation. That drives the majority of private capital particularly to us and to other project financings. That's a whole other conversation. It's been under review, it's been under revision, and it's now under litigation. That creates an environment leading most likely for banks to just kind of wait and watch and hold. And this is on top of a current regulatory, environment of regulatory relief for banks. It's possible that in some circumstances going forward, banks are going to be less accountable for their CRA record if they want to grow or close branches, open branches, merge, et cetera. And this is, on top of real concern about recession. So, I think banks are hanging in there. They're certainly serving us well, but in general, I don't see a big uptick. So you're saying government goes down, who's going to go up? I don't think it's the banks. And by the way, this is real money we're talking about. The government just issued a report from one of the banking regulatory agencies that showed that in 2023, banks in their community development lending, not home mortgage, not small business, just community development, issued $126 billion of community development loans in 2023. That's astonishing. There's another astonishing number, but I hate to be a downer. That was a decrease of 15% from the prior period. So I think the trend lines are not great, and that's worrisome for us. So banks may not be the ones who are able to step up in lieu of government. Government spending is, as you know, we all read the paper. HUD's getting significant cuts, and there's cuts to money, not just cuts to staffing. So it's kind of like the IRS today. My wife is actually trying to settle a state of some relative. She's got a problem. She's called the IRS 15 times over the 2 weeks. Nobody is there to pick up the phone. We hear that some of our developers are having similar problems with HUD, with regional offices, because they've just cut the staff so significantly. That's part of what we need as an engine to keep going. Our CDFI fund, the one that CDFIs use to get equity grants, which builds our net assets, which allows us to borrow more, which allows us to give more money to Malika, that is at risk. The administration has proposed to zero it out. Again, $300 million supports an industry managing $450 billion. That to me actually sounds like a pretty good deal, pretty small investment. We were looking at climate funding under the IRA, the Greenhouse Gas Fund. That's $25 billion that was going to flow to community development actors, currently in litigation, frozen. So philanthropy, I think, given what's going on, not to mention other issues that we're dealing with politically, is stepping up in some different ways. Civil rights, democracy, immigration. There's a lot of issues. Safety net programs. They can't fill every gap, and they're trying to think about their response. So super challenging. If we think about who fills the gaps, and this is something I think everybody should hear loud and clear, this is not compliance capital. This is not philanthropy, the funding, the lending that we want to do to Allopata and to other groups. This is risk-adjusted, good risk-adjusted returns, structured deals. It's performed very well. We've never lost a dime for our investors. I have an S&P investment rating, which demonstrates how well we're doing. So, it's a little bit hard to see where that money's coming from. But lastly, I'll just say what gives me hope. I think in broad terms, there's an increase in values-based investing. We see it, we feel it, we hear about it. I'm not sure it's flooding in. A lot of wealth out there. Wealth is being transferred to a new generation of deciders, a new generation of allocators, and that feels important. And for some foundations, they're kind of doing this all-in approach. We're not just going to take our earnings from the endowment and make grants. We're going to use some of that endowment to do mission-related investing. So I want to be positive. I want to be optimistic. It's a little bit hard to see where the cavalry is coming. We all have to figure out a way to work with the new administration, for instance. And they're talking about opportunity zones and talking about how CDFIs could be an eligible investment. That's exciting. That's one ray of sunshine. So we're going to just sort of keep working on every front. And I think, like Malika's saying, come up with great ideas. like guarantees, and hope that we can still keep putting these projects together.
Yeah, and I think that the other part to that, Dan, is that we need to democratize these things. It should not be the responsibility of CDFIs or us or government to come up with all these ideas. I feel that when we build capacity, our own communities come up with great ideas, you know? And many times we don't realize that we don't need to figure that all out. I mean, we need to provide the the space, the platforms, the technical assistance, so these ideas can flourish. And I'll give you an example. We have a housing crisis in Miami. We can leave it up to the government, to the homeless trust, to the developers to develop housing, or we can allow homeowners to develop an additional unit in their site. And then we are doubling the number of homes we have in the city overnight. And nobody has to be, of course, we need to staff it properly, but you're staffing it. You're not creating all these units by yourself. I think that we need to allow others to also take leadership. And I think that that's part of the solution, is allowing others, unusual suspects, to take leadership.
I think that's fascinating. And again, for the next podcast we all do together, let's start talking about disaster recovery and resilience, because that's the one thing that we're going to have more of. That's the one thing. By the way, we're over here fighting for the crumbs. Maleka's trying to put these deals together. But when a disaster happens, it's an absolute flood of money. But that comes in to build it back the old way. It doesn't come in to build it back better, truly. And insurance companies, who you don't often hear about as major players in community development, some, not all, they're dislocating all these markets. And I think there's some opportunity, I won't say responsibility, in terms of the call to democratize these, the opportunity for ideas. Let's think about who really has a stake in these communities and who needs to make sure these communities are resilient. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. And Miami's at the core of
deepers.
of all of that. So we don't know what this summer's going to look like. So crossing our fingers.
Wow.
Malek, you made a really good point about philanthropy and, private lenders, private funders needing to be bold in this moment. And we had the example of Bill Gates, and not everyone has Bill Gates or Melinda Scott money, being bold and really investing. So if you were to talk to philanthropy at large, private funders at large, and this is for a question for all of you, what's the argument here for staying bold, and especially in this time? What case can you make for, despite the assaults that we're seeing on all of the institutions that you just mentioned, why should you stay the course?
We got to stay the course because that's what we came to do. I don't think that we can, we need to have courage. You cannot live this life if you're not courageous and if you're not, deeply rooted in your principles. I think that Alapata CDC is very much invested in creating a community that can thrive, whether it's the businesses, the residents in the housing, preserving, the cultural heritage of the area. And one of the things that we've been able to do through Main Street America, being a Main Street community and living cities, is work with other communities within Miami that are also becoming Main Streets and create a commercial acquisition fund. And the goal of this commercial acquisition fund is to accelerate the pace on which communities are able to stay rooted in place. Right now in Miami, you could go buy a place and an investor can come by and sweep it off your hands for cash, and you don't have a chance anymore. So I think that the uncertainty that's happening right now is actually benefiting us because people are being a little bit more cautious, which gives us an opportunity to buy, to do, to move, because we believe in what we're creating. Because it's not about this one site that I'm purchasing, it's about the businesses that we're building. and the people that we are empowering to make this community a greater, better place. So I think that that's the difference. Through the Commercial Acquisition Fund, we will have funding to be able to act quickly and compete with these investors. And that, I think, it's something that is kind of similar to the pursuit loan that Daniel was talking about. You need to have the capital to go out there and do the things, or else you're not doing anything. You can't even get off the ground. So the goal of the Commercial Acquisition Fund is to have a fund where we have capital allocated just to build communities. So nonprofits, Main Street organizations can, buy the properties and work with the small businesses and root communities in place. And that's the goal of that. So that's really inspiring. The fact that we're doing that with the city of Miami and with the Miami Foundation makes it even more special.
I would add just a couple of quick things. One, why stay bold? It's not working. Some things are great, but look at CRA. Remember that number I talked about? We've poured billions and billions and billions of dollars into community, and while we've done a lot of good things, our communities are more segregated than ever before. And we're still seeing some real areas where we're falling behind. We have a housing shortage. We have a childcare crisis. We've got real issues. And so I think we just have to continue to invest in these communities, because without communities, without workers, without employees, without a lot of things, we're all going to fall behind. It's not going to work. Two, another argument for that might be a little controversial, but if we have an administration, say what you will, that is really intent on bringing a lot of things back to the United States and bringing back manufacturing, bringing back a lot of activity, then guess what? You need to invest in cities. And the CHIPS manufacturing program, which was started in a prior administration, but could involve, economic development blasts when a major computer chip manufacturer goes to a place and brings 30,000 workers. We're going to have to keep developing the community infrastructure to support new residents and new workers and new members of that community. So our jobs will be even more important. The last thing I'll say, and again, I love that idea about guarantees, it actually doesn't take that much, because we're not just talking about access to credit, we're talking about access to financial systems. And I think that distance between the average citizen, people in underserved communities, and the existing conventional financing systems, that gap's getting bigger. So how do we create a little bit of that WD-40? How do we create that intermediation? How can we give somebody a little support or a little enhancement or a little guarantee so that they can actually go get a home mortgage or go get a credit card or go get a construction loan, et cetera? And so I think the better we do on that, the better we'll do. We're working with home-based childcare providers in San Francisco, another invisible workforce, mostly women of color, who, by the way, are the biggest factors in resiliency after a disaster, because if you can't send your kids to childcare, you can't go back to work. And we're working with the city of San Francisco to facilitate home ownership opportunities for some of those, home-based operators who are in rental apartments. And we've actually brought in the Federal Home Loan Bank through Lyft's relationship and a bank's relationship that's helping us to bring in some funding for that. So the more that we can kind of put together these coalitions and these financing partners, the better that we can do in terms of supporting local communities. That's why we're never going to stop doing this work. And that's why it's important to stay bold on experimenting and trying and creating new solutions, because the problems keep changing too, by the way. So, but here we are.
Yeah, Justin, if I may, I think why keep, pushing forward? Why keep hopeful? I think because we believe that cities are still the place where people can thrive in this country. We've seen that even through COVID, even through, financial crisis, when people organize, when the right, community-based capital allocators, community lenders, investors, mission-aligned funders are having the same conversation and are funded and empowered to do what they do best, which is, deploy innovative products, deploy capital that is more patient, that it really meets people where they are, will see better results. We saw that through COVID. As the second wave or the second round of emergency funding touch the ground and cities across the country, we realized that CDFIs were critical in deploying and dispersing those funds. Because they had the connection, the proximity to community, because folks, even though this country is getting very close to, getting, I think, close to 90% in terms of, access to banking and folks having bank accounts, the relationships and trust between community lenders and communities and business serving organizations and communities is still something that doesn't have any substitute. So we need to continue to empower these folks, continue to connect the folks who have access to funding, to capital, with the folks who have the expertise and the connections to make those decisions, to make different decisions when they have capital, and create new products and different products that actually meet the needs of folks. We need to go back to the numbers. We need to understand that we're not asking funders or investors, or even the federal government to take an unreasonable risk here. We have the data to show that by investing in the community development industry, you will get, if not better results, you will get comparable results in terms of repayment, in terms of access to services, than as if you would have invested to a traditional channel. So we need to use the data to continue to tell the story about how this sector can really create more opportunities for everyone, how this sector has been critical in creating more opportunities for people. And I think Living Cities can play a role in helping, folks like Dan and Mileka tell the stories of, success and impact that they're gathering across the country. We can serve as a platform so the stories can be put in front of more funders, more investors, more decision makers who may not be hearing from Mileka, or have not had the pleasure of working with Dan in the past. How can we serve as a bridge, as a panel, as an amplifier for the stories to reach more people and more decision makers?
Santiago, I would actually add something to what you're saying. We keep throwing out the word risk and talking about risk. And I think about risk a lot because that's what I face every single time we want to do something that we know will work, that we know that it's a good idea, that we know is catalytic. And I'm faced, the response is risk, risk, risk. And I think that the answer to risk is trust. Business moves at the speed of trust. If CDFIs, funding sources, foundations, whomever is investing, knows and understands the end user, they are going to have a different relationship with risk. I think that that's something that we really need to think through, and how they're not just providing capital, but they're truly invested in the success of that project, because I think that that's what makes the difference.
And trust should be based on experience, not just assets.
Yes.
Tying it all together with a neat little bow, what does a broader economy look like when catalytic capital is being used well? Like, how does it shift who gets to benefit and build wealth?
Well, I think that although we're working in Miami, Alapara is a microcosm of many communities across the country. Many communities that have people that have hopes, want to build businesses, want to create jobs, want to bring their best ideas forward. And by investing in those ideas, we create jobs, we create housing, we create all the things that we need in our communities. It is important that it's an integrated approach. I don't think that one entity alone can do it. It is not the nonprofit organizations. It is not the CDFIs. It is not the banks or the government. I think that what this moment calls is for a coalition of the willing from different aspects of the financial systems to come together and build brand new products with community, with the end user at the table, testing these products to make sure that we can change or have a new course for the things that we truly want to see in the future.
Oh, I wish I didn't have you go first because that was poetic and wonderful, but I'll try to offer a less artful discussion. So great, and I think we've talked about it. So the work that we do is investment. And when you make investment, you have economic growth. It makes me think about the low-income housing tax credit industry, which is huge, right? Billions and billions and billions. And frankly, a lot of what our work is when we do this is to catalyze those developments. You don't have equity investors come in to finance pre-development or acquisition. That's what CDFIs do, and that's what Blakes helps others do. So if we don't make that financing, we don't get the ball rolling. Banks don't come in to provide construction financing. And those equity investors who are, that's an enormous source of capital, they're not coming in to make investments. All of that investment generates jobs. All of those investments generates wages and business income. All of those investments generate tax revenues. So this is just a great investment that our government should be making. We actually participated in something called the Golden State Acquisition Fund in California to help affordable housing. It's a fund for pre-development and acquisition financing. Started off years ago at $23 million. Today it's $300 million because we've been so successful at recycling the loan repayments. Lyft and a bunch of other CDFIs have done that work. It's created or preserved over 10,000 apartments. And again, when you do that and you have homes, you have jobs, you have taxpayers. So this is really all about what catalyzes these community investments, which create the homes, the services, the infrastructure that people and communities need to thrive, including childcare. So we think all of that is really important.
Dan, Malika, Santiago, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, your expertise, and your hope for the future and a hope for an economy where everyone can achieve the American dream.
Thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate it.
The future of community development finance isn't just about dollars. It's about changing the power structure behind them. Whether through a multi-billion-dollar institution like Lyft or a grassroots effort like Allocators, the path forward is clear. Catalytic capital shouldn't just flow into communities. It should be led by them. Now, that's all for today's episode of Life with Living Cities. Subscribe and stay tuned for more stories at the intersection of capital, equity, and impact. Once again, thanks to Malika, Dan, and Santiago for joining us, and thank you for joining us here again on Live with Living Cities. We're grateful to have you with us as we explore what it takes to build a more equitable and inclusive future. Now, if you'd like to learn more or get involved, visit livingcities.org. And if you found this episode meaningful, please be sure to subscribe and share it with others who care about closing the wealth gap and driving change. A heartfelt thank you to all of our partners and supporters. You make this work possible. Until next time, I'm Justin Charles, and this has been Live with Living Cities.